Lord Howard joins us here at Westminster. Morning to you.
Morning, Nick.
Before we get to the issue itself, let's begin with that point. You were at Cambridge University with Ken Clarke. He is a Conservative, isn't he? What on earth is going on that he's been thrown out after all those years' service?
He is. He's a very old friend of mine. We've been friends for 60-odd years. And I say what I'm about to say with a very heavy heart, because he and some of the other 21 Conservative MPs who rebelled last night have been friends of mine for a long time. But I think the logic of events, sadly, has driven the Prime Minister to the decisions that he's taken. Let me explain why I think that's the case. If that measure hadn't been taken, we're going to have a general election. And the general election, one way or another, is going to decide this question. So if the outcome of that general election was a Conservative victory, but perhaps with not a very big majority, and you still had 20-odd Conservative MPs who were determined to thwart the government's plans, we would be in exactly the same place where we are now after a general election. So at this general election, when it comes, everyone has to know with total clarity that if they vote Conservative, and if a Conservative government is elected, we will leave the European Union.
But in a sense, what that reveals is that this decision is not just about a defiance of parliamentary whipping, in other words, not obeying the rules, as it were. It's a cleansing. It's a clearing out of pro-European Tories as a deliberate act. Now, I put it to you that Margaret Thatcher had pretty strong views on Europe, but she never dreamt of doing such a thing.
She wasn't faced with this situation. She wasn't faced with a situation in which Parliament has consistently refused to implement a decision made by the British people in a referendum.
But won't people who look to, and you know you will have got votes from them yourself when you ran an election, won't people, like Ruth Davidson, for example, who's tweeted this morning to say, in the name of all that is good and holy, is there no longer room for the Conservative Party for Nicola Soames? Won't people like her, people who look to her, people who look to Soames or Clarke or the other, say, this is not a party for us, we can't vote for it, we can't be members of it, we're off?
Well, I hope they won't come to that conclusion, and this is a very sad moment. But we have to resolve this issue. And I just want to say a word about the arrogance of the majority of this House of Commons. Not only do they think they know better than the British people on this issue, they are not prepared now, apparently, to let the British people have their say.
In an election, you mean?
In an election.
Now,
because the election would give the people the opportunity to decide whether they back the Prime Minister and his strategy or whether they don't. But the House of Commons, as we understand it, wants to deny the British people that opportunity.
Quick word then, because you locked eyes with Keir Starmer when he was talking to me earlier. He seemed to want your approval as if he were up in court or in Parliament against each other. What he's saying is we'll abstain on an election. We will allow one, but later. Now, any advice for Boris Johnson? Is there a way round that? Because the Constitution at the moment, we don't have a written one, but says he needs 2/3 of MPs to vote for an election.
Well, that is in an act of Parliament. That is written. But I suspect there are other things he can do. I'm not in government. I'm not in a position to advise him. And I don't know what his thinking is. But I suspect that there are ways in which we can have an election which will resolve this issue. And let me finish by saying I agree with something Rory Stewart said earlier on your programme. This is a phase. We've got to get this done. But afterwards, I hope and believe we can bring the country together, we can bring the party together, and we can move forward in a much more consensual fashion.
Lord Howard, Michael Howard, thank you for joining us.